When I was in preschool, I remember having a best friend named Mary. I still remember her perfectly, down to the lamb sweater she always wore, and her haircut very similar to how mine was. I remember playing with her in my room, sitting with her during lunch and craft time, and I remember her coming to my birthday party and even playing tag all day. After preschool had ended and kindergarten began, Mary stopped showing up at school and I never really saw her again since. A few years ago, I'm 17 now, I asked my mom what had happened to Mary and where she had went. My mom informed me that there was no such person, and there never had been. She told me that she would hear me talking to myself in my room. I always ran around by myself playing tag, and that even my preschool teachers had mentioned that I would always introduce them and other students to my friend, but no one ever saw her. I blocked my childhood memories out until I was about 15, so I really have no recollection of a lot of things that had happened. But Mary is one person I've never forgotten, or been able to forget, and I never understood why. Now I live in a very small town famous for a school bombing in the late 1920s. I searched some records and found a girl that looked very similar to Mary who was killed in the explosion. A lot of the people had reported seeing unrecognizable children dressed in outdated clothing at the elementary school, but no one I know has ever talked about seeing them at or around or in their house, or even wearing clothing that was similar to New Age children.
I attended the same university for my bachelor's and my PhD. There was a lovely woman by the name of Jennifer, who was my reading and content area instructor. All the guys swooned over her because she was gorgeous, and I loved her because she read us The Giver out loud. She was an awesome instructor and was doing her PhD in literacy. Fast forward a few years and Jen has moved to South Carolina to teach literacy. I'm now in my PhD program and in the same grad student's office that she used to work in, with other literacy people that were her colleagues. And then we get the news that she was murdered by her boyfriend. Everyone is totally devastated, and it was a huge blow to the department as she was genuinely loved by everyone who knew her. So a few days after her funeral, her body was brought home. I'm in the office suite, very early in the morning when no one else is about. The grad students had a fishbowl office, within a larger office suite that was locked and had light motion sensors. I'm walking in and pass a locked door and window, and I see a woman with short dark hair walk the other way inside, which was weird because the lights didn't flicker when she moved. So I walked around the corner to the door with a key code and let myself in. I walk inside and head to where I saw her. The lights flicker on when they sense me. No one is there. It's just me in eerie suites of empty office. I swear to God that it was her, saying goodbye to a place she spent so many years, where she had so many good friends. It spooked the hell out of me, and it made me quite sad too.
When I was in the 8th grade, I went on a school trip that was called the Louisiana Tour. It was mostly going around to significant sites in South Louisiana. One of the places we went was Myrtle's Plantation, which is considered to be one of the most haunted places in the country. There are all kinds of stories about the place, but at one point we were standing in a room as a part of a larger group, and the tour guide was talking about something, but I don't remember what. As I'm standing there, I start to hear what sounds like someone hitting a piano key. After I heard it a couple of times, I started to look around for the source of the noise. I didn't see a piano, but I kept hearing it. So I asked my friends who were standing near me if they heard it, and they said no. When I heard it again, I said there it is again, and that they must have heard it, and they thought I was crazy. So I went back to looking around the room. Everyone's eyes were on the tour guide except for one woman. She caught my eye and pointed at me, then at her ear with a questioning look. I realized she was asking if I heard it too, and I nodded. At this point, the tour guide starts telling a story about a soldier who had died there, and that he played the piano and multiple guests had reported hearing him playing it in the night. I honestly didn't know what to think, and I guess I still don't. I talked to the woman as we were all leaving the room, and she had heard the exact same thing as me, but her husband and son had not heard it.
Many years ago, when I met my ex, her family and her lived in a mobile home. My ex has this younger sister who is a bit messed up, in and out of psych wards, etc. So, my ex and her younger sister shared a small room in the mobile home. And whilst we were dating, and before my son was born, she told me the story about how her younger sister would wake up and talk to the man in the hallway. The man always had a suitcase and wore a brimmed hat. My ex and her family always dismissed them as, well, your younger sister is just a bit nuts. Flash forward a few years. My ex and I have a son together. Her parents moved out of the mobile home and into a house, and were renting the mobile home to my ex. Our son's room was the exact same room where my ex and her sister slept in. One night after our son had gone to bed, and had been asleep for a while, I went to check on him. We heard him get out of bed, and we figured that he'd come out of his room to ask us to use the potty. Instead, he started talking to someone. He said hi, and started talking about his favourite stuffed animals. At the time, it was a ducky. Curious, I called back and asked him who he was talking to. He pops his head out of the room and informs me he's talking to a man with a suitcase who was wearing a hat. At the time, he was about 2.5, and no one had ever told him about his auntie seeing the same guy.
I come from a fairly religious family. We were Jehovah's Witnesses growing up, the RLDS, then Baptist when I went to live with my mom. That being said, the entire family always believed in spirits, ghosts, demons, witches, elementals, etc. As a kid, I had no clue what ghosts were except what was on TV. Not until I was about 8 or 9 when I was laying on a couch in our living room. The grown-ups were sitting in front of the couch in a circle. I was just laying there listening to the stories of my elders when my grandmother says, "Oh, Michael," my dad's name, "I saw a male ghost walk through your house yesterday." Since then, I've had some experiences, and I've always been fond of the experiences of my family members and other people's too. My first encounter with a ghost was with whom I believe was the man my grandma mentioned. I had gotten home from school and wanted a snack, so I grabbed an orange, peeled it, and took it to the trash can. Our trash can was in our pantry storage room. From our front door straight ahead is our kitchen. To the left, the basement. Straight ahead from the kitchen is the storage room. Behind that, the laundry room. As I was headed to the trash can, I remember getting pretty antsy. I felt as if someone was right above me, almost as if someone was towering over me. I put the peels in the trash can, and as soon as I closed the lid, I heard a very deep-sounding, menacing laugh right behind me. I was pretty terrified and ran to find my sister and tell her what had happened. She was surprised because she said she's heard the same laugh in that room before, which made me feel a little better. Yes, it could have been my neighbor's voice traveling into the house, but that room had no doors or windows, and I heard it right behind me. The second encounter I had was when I was in 5th grade. I finally got to stay home alone one night whilst my dad and siblings ran errands, and I was super excited. I had never stayed home alone before and enjoyed the peace and quiet. I decided I would try and finish my homework as quick as I could so that I could play video games by myself instead of sharing with my brother. So I'm sitting at the dining room table. Everything is fine and I'm getting my work done. After about 20 minutes, I start to hear the basement door rattle. I think maybe a draft is coming through and write it off as that. It rattles again. Whatever, it's just wind, I think. But all of a sudden I hear footsteps running through the house. Not like your usual steps here, steps there, but I hear running. From over by the basement all the way to the back of the house where our bedrooms are. My dogs start barking, and I freak out. I'm frozen in my chair for what feels like forever, feeling that if I move, it'll happen again. I muster up the courage to grab our house phone and run out of the house. I sit at the edge of our driveway and call my mom, telling her what's happening and just stare at the windows of our house. As I'm talking to her, the curtains in the front room start to move as if someone was peeking through them. My mom calls my dad and tells him what had happened. I sit there for another 30 minutes until he and my siblings get home. I didn't stay home alone again for a long time. This next one is something that happened to my mother. My mother has always had a sort of gift. She has been able to hear spirits speak to her and see spirits since she was a little kid. The first story she ever told me, though, kept me up all night. It was dinner time, and me and my brother and mother were all at the dinner table. We were all talking about various topics, and the subject of ghosts popped up. She told us she would tell us a story if we promised we weren't going to get scared. When she was about 6 years old, she lived in Virginia with her 4 siblings and parents. They lived in a pretty old house that had a lot of history. She said she remembered being inside playing with her dolls. She was sitting next to a vent and said she started to hear something in the basement. She said she leaned in and put her ear to the vent, and all she heard was her name. She said that there was a woman's voice coming from the vent, saying her name in a song voice like, "Valerie, Valerie." She said she got up, ran outside, and told her parents. They said she was making it up and had an overactive imagination. Years later, my mom found out that a woman hung herself in the basement of that house. This last one is another one that involves my mother. She told me when I was about 23. She moved back to Virginia when I was about 17 or 18. My brother went with her as well. She's a nurse and decided to go take care of my grandfather as he was dying, since she was the most qualified out of her siblings. A little before my grandfather passed, Mother decided to look for houses to live in since she couldn't bear living in the house that her father was so sick in. Understandable. So she had a couple of houses picked out that she wanted to look at for her and my brother. The first house was small and wouldn't work out for them, so her and the realtor went to the next one on the list. They got to the house, and everything was fine until they got inside of the place. My mother said she took 5 steps into the house, looked into the first room, and said she saw a man standing there. He was in old clothing, like a late 1800s, early 1900s style suit with a top hat and cane. Behind the man sat 6 little children. She said they were emaciated and dirty, wearing rags compared to what he was wearing. My mother said that in her head she heard his voice. The man told her that this was his house, that she wasn't welcome here, and to turn around and leave immediately. Don't ever come back or there will be consequences. She said this all happened so fast that she barely noticed the realtor ask her if she was okay. Apparently my mom had stopped dead in her tracks and had gone pale. My mom just told the realtor that she suddenly felt sick and wouldn't be looking at any more houses that night.
My grandfather died last year, sometime when my son was maybe a year old. We had dinner with the whole family every Friday, so my son had seen him several times. My grandfather was very quiet and a proud man, but when he thought he was alone or unseen, he would make silly faces at my son to get a laugh. A couple of nights after his funeral, my son, who likes to crawl into bed with us in the middle of the night, started laughing uncontrollably at 2 a.m. So I get out of the bed to go see what's going on, and find my son sitting in the middle of the living room, in the dark, laughing. Remember, it's 2 a.m. So I say, "Hey buddy, what are you doing?" He just replies, "Papa, funny." I got a little nervous for some reason and went to pick him up and bring him up to our room for the rest of the night. And as I'm hauling him away, he says, "Bye, Papa," and blows a kiss at absolutely nothing I can see. I attended the same university for my bachelor's and my PhD. There was a lovely woman by the name of Jennifer, who was my reading and content area instructor. All the guys swooned over her because she was gorgeous, and I loved her because she read us The Giver out loud. She was an awesome instructor and was doing her PhD in literacy. Fast forward a few years and Jen has moved to South Carolina to teach literacy.
Mary stopped showing up at school and I never really saw her again since. A few years ago, I'm 17 now, I asked my mom what had happened to Mary and where she had went. My mom informed me that there was no such person, and there never had been. She told me that she would hear me talking to myself in my room. I always ran around by myself playing tag, and that even my preschool teachers had mentioned that I would always introduce them and other students to my friend, but no one ever saw her. I blocked my childhood memories out until I was about 15, so I really have no recollection of a lot of things that had happened. But Mary is one person I've never forgotten, or been able to forget, and I never understood why. Now I live in a very small town famous for a school bombing in the late 1920s. I searched some records and found a girl that looked very similar to Mary who was killed in the explosion. A lot of the people had reported seeing unrecognizable children dressed in outdated clothing at the elementary school, but no one I know has ever talked about seeing them at or around or in their house, or even wearing clothing that was similar to New Age children. When I was was in preschool, I remember having a best friend named Mary. I still remember her perfectly, down to the lamb sweater she always wore, and her haircut very similar to how mine was. I remember playing with her in my room, sitting with her during lunch and craft time, and I remember her coming to my birthday party and even playing tag all day. After preschool had ended and kindergarten began,